Welcome to the Grace Story Podcast, where inspiring stories are brought to life. This podcast is made possible by Grace College and Seminary, located on the shores of Winona Lake in the great state of Indiana. I'm your host, Dr. Drew Flam. This is the Grace Story Podcast. Today on the podcast, we have Dr. Jeff Bogue, Senior Pastor of Grace Church of Greater Akron, where he has served with his wife Heidi since 1993. Jeff and Heidi are both Grace College grads, and Jeff is also a graduate of Grace Seminary. Jeff and his wife Heidi are the proud parents of 5 boys and a girl. Jeff is also an author of numerous books, including Living Naked, How an Ordinary Person Can Live an Extraordinary Life, which is quite the book title. Reset, Why Discipleship Isn't About Trying Harder, the One-Step Discipleship Journals, and 5 Assumptions about God and Why They Are Wrong. Beyond pastoring, writing, and speaking nationally, Jeff also oversees Grace College Akron campus, where over 40 young adults are currently earning their degree from Grace while engaged in ministry of Grace Church. His bio also says something about Ohio State and country music, but I'm going to skip over those for
that's
today.
That's the most important part of that.
Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for being on campus these 2 days, speaking in chapel, amongst many other things. Tell us a little bit about what you're speaking in chapel about and why.
This time around, we're speaking about what it truly means to be a disciple, based on Jesus' definitions of it. So the scriptural passage is Luke 14:25 through 35, and then the second chapel is Colossians chapter 3, 1 through 10. But it's about what I told the students today is, when we think about following Christ, most people think about following Christ out of tradition or team, like instead of a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Hindu, I'm a Christian, or behaviors. I don't do these things, I do these things. And none of those are Jesus's definitions. And so just pressing into that a little bit and trying to help them think it through, and then talking about the ramifications of that if Christ is our greatest affection, our greatest authority, our greatest governance, suddenly our lives should probably be a little bit more radical than they are, be a little bit easier to identify. And that's my passion. I'm talking about this with our church and stuff right now. I just think this is what our world is dying to know. I'm not trying to save the culture. It's lost, right? We're not going to put those genies back in the bottles. But the radical life of Jesus is what draws people to Jesus. And so if the church, if true Christ followers aren't living that way, then the people around us can't find the hope that they're desperate for. So that's what we're talking about and walking them through a little bit.
That's great. I want to rewind a little bit because you shared even this morning your own testimony of coming to Christ while at Grace.
Right.
So, how did you get to Grace, and then what during your experience led you to accepting Christ?
Yeah, so I came to Grace for 2 reasons. My brother went here, and my 2 sisters did some of their education here. So it's kind of a family thing. So that's how I knew about Grace. And then buddies from high school came out here to play soccer, and I think I just followed them out here and got connected that way. But I came to Grace. I was a guy that grew up in a Christian home, very godly, very loving parents. Grew up in a very legalistic church. I did not have legalistic parents, but I grew up in a very legalistic church. Went to a Christian school. My whole life was important to my dad. My dad was a factory worker. And so for him to pay that tuition, he would literally just work overtime to get us through school. And so I knew the Christian subculture inside and out, knew how to perform and excel in it. And to me, that was what Christianity was. Now, you pull me out in front of people and get into my private life or my secret life, it was Christless, right? So everything from my morality to the way that I thought and what I valued and all those kind of things. And through high school, that was true. I came to Grace. I didn't really come to Grace because I was pursuing Christ, being in a Christian culture was not foreign to me. So going to a Christian school was no big deal to me. But I was driven by that same thing. I was just godless. But I knew the Bible, and I knew how to perform. And so if you needed me to act godly, I could. Easy peasy, right? So it was, I lived that way through my freshman and sophomore year of college here at Grace, with all that was involved with living that way. My junior year of college, I fell in with some people who were genuine Christ followers. And it shocked me. I'm not sure I realized that there were people who didn't fake it. So it shocked me a little bit, and I was deeply drawn to them. And I didn't have a crisis. I wasn't needy. Like a popular, fun-loving guy. I wasn't lonely, but it was the genuineness of their love for Christ. And I remember looking at them one night at a Bible study, and I thought, because I would go to these things, I knew how to operate, but I remember thinking, I thought, I think they actually believe this stuff. And I didn't. Yeah. They were. This was in the early '90s, and so the worship movement was just kind of starting, and they're worshiping, and I thought to myself, I think they are actually worshiping God, and it was foreign to me, and God used that, and in particular, a guy named Steve Huber, who was a college student, and the genuineness of his faith, and it attracted me. And I, one night by myself, I was searching for God, so I was reading the Bible. I read about Jesus walking on water. I knew the Bible, like I said, was educated in the Bible and all those kind of things. And I thought to myself, well, he either did that or he didn't. And if he did it, he's God. If he's didn't, the whole thing is useless. And I thought, I'm going to choose to believe that he did. And so I would say, if my mom was alive, she'd say I accepted Jesus when I was 6. But I would say I accepted Jesus when I was a junior in college. I yielded my life to him, and that was here at Grace. And from there, God called me into ministry, which I don't know, it's maybe another conversation, or maybe this one, I don't know, but my life deeply transformed from that point forward. So
I remember you in your book talked about Steve, and like you said this morning, he was a disciple of Christ, not always a rule follower,
no,
but had a genuine passion for following Christ.
Yeah,
not just following the rules.
Yeah, in fact, the tradition I grew up in, he would have been ostracized, because this is the early 90s, and Steve had his ears pierced and his nipples pierced and tattoos and long hair, and my church would have said, well, he's going to hell, And I think that's what short-circuited me. I'm like, I think he just loves Jesus and he looks wrong. And he's in ministry today. He started, I was just talking to him not long ago, but he started all kinds of churches, and I'm like, it just blew my mind, and God used him in a great way.
That's awesome.
I remember one time we were praying, or we were driving, and he goes, Jeff, I'm going to pray for you, but he was driving. And so he started to pray, and the whole time he's praying, I'm thinking, his eyes are open. His eyes are open. Can you talk to God with your eyes open?
It's in there somewhere, isn't it?
Somewhere, but God used him in great ways.
That's awesome. You did go into ministry like right after college, correct? So, and where you're at currently, within the Grace Church family, at least, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about God calling you to ministry, and then you heading out to Northeast Ohio and Buckeye country and all that stuff, and getting started in ministry.
Yeah, so I came back to school, and the first time I ever felt led by the Spirit of God was I had been living in Philadelphia in the summertime, and had thought about leaving Grace College and going there because I was working with some abused kids and I really loved them. And so I thought about that, and I prayed. And the first time I ever felt led by the Holy Spirit to do something was to return to Grace College. And I felt like God was calling me back here to meet my wife. And so I came back.
Had you met her yet?
I'm looking still. No,
Oh, no.
no. I came back and connected with my wife, Heidi. We've been married 26 and a half years.
Wow.
And I had known Heidi, but she knew I was a fake. And so when I came back and I was transformed by Christ, she was like, "You've always been good looking, but now you love Jesus," kind of thing. And so we started to date, and I was hungering for the Lord, like truly. And one night in Beta, the old Beta dorm.
Good things happen in Beta.
Good things happen in Beta. That's right. Beta life is good. Beta is good. So I was praying and asking the Lord, what does it mean to follow you? And I was in 1 Peter. I was reading the scriptures. I was praying. And I was reading about God's holiness. And it make me cry, man, like talking about this stuff. I was praying about God's holiness, and I felt like I needed to be low. Like the old-timey word is prostrate, where you fall on your face before God. And I just felt I had been so like wicked before Christ that I feel like I need to be low. And I got up from, I don't even know why I did this really. I thought, what's the lowest place I can find? And so I left my dorm. It was like 2:00 in the morning. The dorm wasn't particularly busy. And I went down to the basement of Beta. And the lowest physical place I could find was the laundry room. And I laid prostrate on the floor of the laundry room of Beta. And I said, "Lord, I will do whatever you want me to do. I want you to use my life, and I don't even care what you ask me to do, but I will do it. I love you," right? And so told Heidi about that, and Heidi loves the Lord, and Heidi's the most incredible human being you'll ever meet in your life. And so she was excited about that. And we thought, I thought what that was going to mean was moving to Philadelphia and working in the inner city with these kids. These kids were the first people I ever loved more than myself my whole life. And so I told Heidi, "What do you think about moving to the ghetto?" And you have to know Heidi, but she's like, "Let's do it." She's all in. And so that was our plan, and started preparing for that. And the Christmas break of my senior year of college, I got a call from a church near Akron, Ohio. It's a long story, but they were looking for a youth pastor. I didn't want to be a pastor because I thought pastors were useless. I thought pastors were people that held you to legalism and that you lied in front of and then ignored and just went and did your own thing. And so I got a call from a pastor, long series of events. We went up and talked to this church, found out that they accepted people as they really were. You could come in there as a drug addict, as a prostitute, as a clean-cut Christian, and you were loved and interacted with and embraced. So this church that was real, it had all these broken, messed up people, and they wanted us to work with their teenagers. And I'm like, well, if the parents are this screwed up, the kids must be a ton of fun, And so we went there. So I don't know the exact date, but just we would have graduated like May 15th, and then I know we did start there June 1st.
Wow.
Of that year, and then we got married at the end of the summer. So that was 26 and a half years ago, and I've been at the same church. I don't know how to do anything else, so I really need to hold on to my job there. So,
and God has blessed in ways you could not have imagined.
Yep.
26 years ago, right out of college, and Grace Church of Greater Akron was not a thing at that time.
That's right, yeah.
But over the years, a unique model, unique way of doing ministry has, for lack of a better term, evolved. And I know you've been strategic throughout that. So talk to us about, like, you went to one church, and now what is Grace Church of Greater Akron, and as concisely as possible, how do you explain that story?
So we went to one location, one church. It was called the Norton Grace Brethren Church. Had about 400 people when we went there. I have an incredible mentor named Bob Combs. To me, he's the hero of the story.
Best looking guy there is.
Best looking guy there is.
He'll let you know too.
Yeah, he will. He's an amazing, amazing man. And so I was his youth pastor, and then Bob and I have always been extremely close with each other and very, very trusting. So probably 2 years after I got there, I became kind of like the chief strategist and the one who started to create like ministry philosophy. And then Bob and I did that together, but I would usually like have some idea, and then he would bring his wisdom and refine it and those kind of things. So we started doing that. That led to us starting what we call a campus of the church. This was in 2000, so 20 years ago now. And Bob asked Heidi and I to go and start that campus. So we took about 125 people, and we started the first campus of Grace Church. And from there, it's like you said, God has just blessed in tremendous ways. So Grace now would have 13,000 people tied to it. We have 8 campuses. We're getting ready to open our 9th campus, and our goal is to open a minimum of 30 campuses. And when I say campus, this is not me on video all over the place. I pastor and shepherd the main campus there. But the way that you should interpret it, or the listener should interpret it, is a church planting movement. So a campus to us is a church plant, and we just unify the back end to maximize resources, vision, philosophy, training, all the rest. So we have 6 campuses in Northeast Ohio. We have 2 in Atlanta, Georgia. And then we're hoping to open, 22 more in the next 24 years is kind of our goal. And that involves us raising up leaders that can lead those campuses. So we call that the movement of Grace Church, and our view of Christ, our view of discipleship, our philosophy of what the church is what we export. But the methods are all localized. So we don't copy music. We don't copy programs. Like I said, I don't preach at every campus. But the vision, the values, the theology, the doctrine, that's what we're really exporting and creating.
That's awesome. Praise the Lord for the impact all over the place and in many different contexts too. You mentioned raising up leaders as being, if you're going to start that many campuses, you got to have a lot of people ready to do it.
Right.
And one of the ways that you're doing that is through your Grace Akron program. Tell us a little bit about the vision of creating that program and what it is now. It's our only site, besides what we have in Winona Lake, it's our only external site for Grace College. So tell us a little bit about that.
So as we were raising up these campuses, we need leaders. So we need pastors, missionaries, directors, etc., people who are ministry professionals who can lead these campuses. And so we realized we need young people who are willing to go into full-time ministry and do this. And our vision and our values are nuanced enough that it's hard to import people. So even if I import you, it's going to take you a few years to really understand what we do. So we found it's easier to raise them. So about 5 years ago, I took that vision to our congregations, and I said, we would like to start investing in young people over the long haul to create these leaders, and they agreed. So we spend about close to $1 million a year on 30 and 30 on the vision, and a big chunk of that is interns and residents. So an intern for us is a part-time employee who's a full-time undergrad student, and a resident is a full-time employee who's a full-time graduate student. And so we started that process, and I think you mentioned in your bio, we have 40 or 50 undergrad students right now working at that. About 2 years into that, the education model, because I believe if you're going to do something for a career, you should get a real education in it. And so the education model we started with, we didn't like. It wasn't doing what we wanted it to. So I'll never forget, I pulled in my drive one day and called Bill Cade up. And I have a cell phone number. We're friends. I said, Bill, I would love to work with Grace. I really want to come home, to Grace. But you guys didn't have what I needed. And Bill, I think it was a week later, was in Akron. And he was like,
sounds like him.
Yeah.
I see opportunity.
Yeah. And he was amazing. Tim Zebarth has been amazing. And those guys came out. Tim and I went to school, by the way.
Okay.
So I have stories if you want them. If you need anything, let me know. Yeah.
I'll let you know when the time is right.
Yeah. But they came out, and Grace School started to design a program for us, and we implemented it. So when you go to Grace Akron, is what we call it. These are it's fully accredited. Mm-hmm. It is taught by live teachers. This is not online stuff. It's a full undergrad degree. So you're doing some math and English and the whole liberal arts thing. And as our students are studying their biblical studies degree, they're also working in the ministry. And so they're learning how to do as they learn kind of how to think and how to see things. And then this fall, we went back to the school and said we could really use a seminary. And so this fall of 2020, Grace Seminary will come to Akron. And it's the same idea that live teaching, you're learning your deeper systematic theologies, doctrines, all those kind of things, while doing ministry full-time. So we have a group of those students. About half of our students are interns and residents. An intern is usually fresh out of high school. Like these kids they'll earn half scholarships or even full rides for us to get their undergrad degree. And then that resident is a post-undergrad. They're going to seminary. About half of our students there are interns and residents, and the other half are from other churches or even our church, but they're studying ministry. They're doing the same thing. We're just interacting with them differently. And in addition, here recently, I became the president of CE National. So there we have the National Youth Institute, which is another Grace College program, and it adds about 60 more students to that umbrella. And so working with Dr. Cadup and Freddie Cardoza, we're trying to morph all that together into can we raise up these guys for full-time ministry. So my dream is to have 200 students studying for full-time ministry at any given one time in the undergrad program. and then filtering into the seminary. And my dream over the next 25 years is to send 2,000 or 3,000 students into full-time ministry, whether it's a campus pastor, a lead pastor, a staff pastor, a director, a children's director, youth director, worship director, whatever, a missionary, really wherever in the kingdom. We obviously need these kids for our own movement, but our real goal is to energize this for the kingdom, because kids today are not being called into full-time ministry. It's kind of a lost thing in the North American church, which is tragic. But we're calling them and giving them a pathway and training them, because it's a real career. And it takes a real education, and really smart people who could do other things choose to do this. And God uses it, and it's a great way to spend your life. And God uses it in great, great ways. So,
and you think about the history of what was first Grace Seminary and then became Grace College as well. And that's how we started, right? I mean, it was call people into ministry, whether it be here or around the world. And it's neat to see that fresh vision be raised up again, to see how many people can we send out into the harvest fields once again. So cool to be able to partner with you in quite a number of ways, and it's just growing daily, it seems. So thank you for the way you've engaged and even been here this week and had more of those conversations. And we at Grace College and Seminary have learned more about the value of raising up leaders from within, and it's neat to see you doing that. And I know more churches are going to hopefully hop on board too.
Love it.
So somehow in the midst of all this, you find time to write. Like, is that sort of like your midnight thing? Like you wake up in the middle of the night, like, hey, I should write a book. Like, where do you fit that into the day?
Just the nooks and crannies. Whenever I'm in the middle of writing a book, I'm like, why am I writing a book? Like, if you've ever written a book, it's hard to do. And but we've just done it over the years. Somebody challenged me one time. They said, your sermons, your podcasts, your social media won't stick around, but the books that you write will linger forever. And so I probably just feel challenged to do it.
So you started a series a few years ago, the Head and Heart series, and your first book in that series, 5 Assumptions About God and Why They Are Wrong. Tell me first why this series, and then what that book specifically is trying to address.
Yeah, so what we press into a lot is we say we need to know the heart and mind of Christ. We turn Christianity into a to-do list or a religious obligation, but understanding why Jesus thinks the way he thinks and how he loves us is really the key to the Christian life. And so Heart and Head, that's where that came from, and why we named it that series is we want to press into those things. So the first book there, 5 Assumptions About God and Why They're Wrong, is us pressing back into the things that become excuses for people to press away from God. And we're like, one of the questions I ask in the book, I actually say this stuff a lot, is I'll say, well, what if you're wrong? And, well, I think this, and this. That's great, but what if you're wrong? What if there's another way to think about things? And so that's where those assumptions came from. And I just labeled kind of like it could have been 100 assumptions about God and why they're wrong, but we had to call it quits somewhere. But kind of the top 5 that I would run into over the years, and we just leaned into them and unplugged it and just said, but what if it's this instead? There's another way to see this stuff that you could look at.
Tell us one of those assumptions of the top 5 that we often make about God.
Yeah. So maybe one of the funnest one is that Christ is for children. And so as a man, I run into this a lot. This is where the idea that God is a crutch, God's for the weak, because we present him like he's for children. So he's a talking tomato, he's a cartoon. We do a lot of stuff for kids, and I'm all for that. I'm all for educating and reaching people at the stage of life that they're in. But even the word Jesus sounds childish to the North American ear.
Sure.
Right? Because we would say, like, Jesus loves me, this I know. We would sing children's songs. Well, at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue. Hitler, Mussolini, Saddam Hussein, every president is going to bow their knee before Jesus Christ, right? So we just press into that. And this Jesus is not, a teddy bear. He is a roaring lion. He is a judge. He is the one who will return victoriously and destroy the forces of evil. And understanding, like, when you look and say, well, why do I need a kiddie story? I'm a grown man. I'm like, right, you don't. But do you need a Lord, a God, a king, a general? That's a very different question. I'm not going to follow my elementary teacher to hell and back.
Yeah.
But I'm going to follow the head of the Navy SEALs, right? And so it's a false assumption, and it really does affect. So men especially, and women too, but we sit in church and we're like, why are we here? I went to Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, right, because you're still being taught Sunday school lessons instead of the radical countercultural call of Jesus Christ on your life. So that would be an example of one of the 5.
You mentioned the next book is at the publisher in the series. What is the topic of that book, and when's it going to come out?
So the working title of that book is Assume I Know Nothing, and it'll probably come out this fall. But what I did in this, I have a friend at our CrossFit gym that my wife and I own and that she goes to a lot. I go to occasionally.
You said you went there this week,
I've
right?
I've been there 4 times this year, and that's 4 more times than I went all of last year. But we have a friend. One of the reasons why we started that gym is because we knew it was a great way to reach people for Christ. So started the gym 3 years ago. We've seen about 20 people come to know Christ.
Wow.
We do baptisms at the gym. We have services at the gym. It's a real fun thing. But one of the gals that accepted Christ there, before she did, she had a death in her family, and she had asked to talk to me. She found out I was a pastor or whatever, and asked Heidi, and so Heidi talked to me, and so I said, yeah. So I said, what if we just sit and talk after the workout, So we sat down and talked, she and I did, there at the gym, and she started asking me questions about heaven and the afterlife and this and that. I started to explain things to her, and somewhere in the course of the conversation, I said, I could tell I was losing her, and so I said, hey, I don't mean to be patronizing, but do you have any idea what I'm talking about? And she goes, no, I don't. And I said, do you know about like the Old Testament and the New Testament? No. Do you know the difference between God and Jesus, and that Christ isn't Jesus's last name? No. Okay. And she looked at me to comfort me now, because I'm like embarrassed, because I felt like I was patronizing to her. And she looked at me and she said, Jeff, she goes, just assume I know nothing. Talk to me like I know absolutely nothing. And so off of that conversation, I looked and said, one of the assumptions that we make at Grace Church when we're reaching our community is that our community is biblically illiterate. They have no idea what you're talking about. When you look at a 24-year-old unbeliever and say, you guys shouldn't be living together, they'll say, why? Well, it's immoral. How? I don't sleep around. I only sleep with her. They have no idea what you're talking about. And so we always assume that they have no idea what we're talking about. And so what I did was I made a teaching series called Assume I Know Nothing. And we tried to explain faith and Christ and salvation as if you walked out of the woods and had never encountered it before. So if you could boil that down to its very, very, very essence, where would you even begin that conversation, right? And I actually have a friend who is a missionary, or he's not a missionary, he's French. He's a pastor in France. And he has to do this because it's such a post-Christian community.
Right.
They have no idea what you're talking about. And so he and I got on the phone and kind of organized these thoughts, and I was picking his brain. I was like, well, what pathway do you take so it's logical? And we figured that out, and then I taught a series on it, and I turned it into a book. And so that's what that is. It's not Christianity for dummies. It's more literally, it's a little bit more like Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Except think of smaller words and a lot lower IQ.
So one I could maybe understand.
One that you and that I could write. There's a lot of crayon. There's a lot of crayon in the book. But that's what it is.
And you have, at least with the first book series, and maybe you're desiring to do this with others, put songs, art, you've kind of surrounded it with some other ways of expressing the ideas.
That's right.
Why bring other art forms into it?
It's just our world that we live in. None of us learn one way. And so my friend Ben Beaver wrote some songs. JeffBogue.org is where all this stuff is. And you can kind of walk through the book. You can listen to these songs that he wrote. And like you said, art and all the rest. We're just like, this is all reinforcing who Christ is and then what this particular truth is that we're leaning into. So just trying to be creative and not assuming everybody learns the way that I learn or Ben learns or whatever. So it's just that. Mm-hmm.
Where is the best place? You mentioned jeffbogue.org.
Org. Yeah.
Okay. And where else, if people want to find you, follow you on social media, whatever it may be, what's the best way to find you?
So I'm so old that all you have to do is Jeff Bogue everything. I'm so old that when all the social media platforms came out, I just used my name. So it's Jeff Bogue on Facebook. It's Jeff Bogue on Instagram. And it's even Jeff Bogue on Twitter.
Okay.
That's where all those things are. You Google it, it's there. This stuff's on Amazon and all those kind of things. And if you Google my name, like the church will come up. And if you just use Jeff Bogue as the gateway,
they'll find you.
You'll get to where you want to be. Just don't come to my house.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing from a broad perspective, a lot of different things that God's been doing and has done in your life. And we could dig into any one of those for a long period of time, but thank you for sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's fun.
And thank you for listening to the Grace Story podcast. Thanks to Dr. Wally Brath, Associate Professor of Worship Arts at Grace, for providing the music, and for Andrew Palladino and Rick Neer for being our co-producers. If you would like, share, comment on this wherever you found it, we would be so appreciative. And we hope you live your best grace story today.